Okay, we're going to try this again. What happened was I recorded the first part of this video and it didn't record. Thank you, GoPro. Even though I've got a tripod and everything and I'm trying to do this a little more professionally than I used to, all my earlier videos, most of them anyway, were because I was working with, you know, just doing it sort of for friends and whatnot, and it wasn't really meant to be for publication. But then, you know, I mean, one thing led to another, and I started to try and do this a little more professionally. So if this is a little bit dark, I'm sorry about that. The light in the background here is sort of washing me out a little bit, but maybe this would be kind of a little bit of a rant. And the second part of the video picks up where I thought my battery cut off, but it wasn't recording anything. So here we go. There's a couple of videos that I saw about a week or two ago. I think the first one's from Uncle Tony. I'll make sure his link is in the description. And the second one is the one that Tony was referring to is, I think, Ford Tech Make You Loco. I think that's the name of the website. Very good YouTube channels, both of them. And Tony's great. He does some great stuff that I never thought of before. And he has great information on his page about things that we should all be wary of when we're like looking for old cars and whatnot, and flipping in particular. I mean, I've pretty much tried to, that's how I found him, and then I found this piece on this Ford. So let me explain this a little bit. Modern cars, I mentioned this a little bit in my intro video. Modern cars essentially, you know, blow. I'm not a big fan. Haven't really liked a lot of what the new cars bring because they are over-engineered, maybe on purpose, for whatever design that they have, regulated by the federal government in particular. But not all of it is good, and let me tell you the story. I'll nutshell it. This is Tony talked about this, and he had some great things to say about this on the over-engineering of cars, all of which I agree with, but I want to add a few things to that. And then the detailing of the problem that happened to this 2000s, I mean, it's not very old, 2019, 2018, 2020, something like that, Ford limited edition pickup. Let me tell you what happened to that Ford limited edition pickup. I'll maybe throw some links both from Tony and Ford, the Loco guy, and so you can see a little bit of what I'm talking about. But hey, you should go visit their sites and maybe you know, maybe give them a like and whatnot, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have known about this. Because, you know, I mean, I don't hang around a lot of this stuff like a lot of these guys do who have established shops and established reputations in their locality. So what happened is there's a water leak that leaked behind the taillight housing of this Ford pickup. And the owner was experiencing intermittent problems. He would go out one day and the radio wouldn't work, go out the next day and the AC wouldn't work. Sometimes both of them wouldn't work. And then some intermittent other problems too. Something would happen, and then maybe the AC or the radio would come back. One day he went out and the car or the truck wouldn't start. So he took it in. Now, what this guy did is he used a computer to, not an OBD, but it was something like that, through a computer, Windows laptop software, to deduce the problems. And it was just a whole ton of things failing. In modern cars, what you have are at least two systems, I guess, from what I understand. One of them is a system that talks very rapidly, constant, rapid communication between all the modules. Usually this is going to be in something like the you know, the ignition modules and whatnot are all going to be talking to each other rapidly. Then there's a secondary system, which is not as fast. It's a different system, and they all talk to each other, the lights, the radio, the AC, that type of thing. So what happened was he started pulling codes, and he started seeing the secondary system was failing. I mean, all of it was failing. And so he couldn't figure out why, until he saw one certain section was all out. And so what he did is he went and unplugged the taillights, and then when he did that, everything came back. The radio worked, the AC worked. So he's kind of lucky, and he says that he was kind of lucky to deduce the problem. Because the OBD is not going to tell you everything. And many times, OBDs are going to get things wrong. And I'll tell you, I'll expand a little bit on that here at the end of this first part. But, so what happened was the water leaked in, it corroded the connections. Now, if you're on my Ford out here, and that happens, which it has in the past, I know because I had to change them out when I bought the truck. All of the pigtails, you just lose a light. That's it. Maybe if something goes bad, you'll blow a fuse. But that's the worst that can happen. In these modern cars, it'll shut down your car. So they got corroded, and the secondary system talks to each other. And what it started doing was sending these signals through the system, and everything else started shutting down because they couldn't talk to each other because of the corrosion in the taillight. In every taillight module on this truck, you've got the light, the pigtail, maybe a backup light, pigtail, and then you have a computer module in there because he had all the bells and whistles. He had like motion sensors on the sides so you could tell if you're getting too close to an object. So what happened is the water came in through a blown rubber gasket that shrank and filled up with water, and it corroded the connectors, but then it got into the computer modules, which are also housed in each and every individual taillight. So long story short, $5,600 just in parts. They had to buy new taillights, they had to buy new modules, they had to buy new pigtails. All of it was ruined based on just a stupid water leak. I have a saying that low tech beats high tech. This is a perfect example of low tech beating high tech. Not everything high tech is good for you. And not everything high tech is good for you, period. And there's a reason for that, which I'll mention here in a minute. So the new cars tend to be over-engineered. That's the most generous way I can put it. But they are also strike out the intuitive, deductive capabilities of the mechanic. And Matthew Crawford wrote a book called Shop Class's Soulcraft, which I just got done reading. And in it, he talks about how the computers, not only do they sometimes fail to give codes, but they're not going to tell you everything. And in the second part of the video, I mentioned Mortsky Repair, who went through this with one of his white dually Chevys, I think it was. He had one of the banks failing, and the OBD was only telling him something was wrong with it. But he found out that the OBD was essentially, I'm going to say essentially wrong. It only told you that something was failing. In the second part of the video where I have different clothes on and everything, which is the earlier video that I shot after I thought this first part of the video died, I explained that. So, wait for the end of that, the second part of this to figure out what he did. But it was great what he did, because he did a very practical, very logical mechanics thing in discovering the problem. But Crawford is right. The computers, what they tend to do is they take away from the intuitive and experiential skill of the mechanic, or the person who wants to do something. And these brand new cars, this is more me than Crawford, but the brand new cars, what they do is they sort of sap young men for wanting to do something. They want to do something with their lives. They want to work on stuff. They want to be productive. They want to be able to say, hey, I fixed something. Look at this. Receive honors from their friends. All those types of things are bound up in a craftsman or someone who works and fixes his own stuff, works with his own hands. Crawford is not wrong in this sense that what happens is tech shortcuts all of that stuff, because it makes the mechanic reliant on the technology. And the technology is not going to tell you everything. And it's certainly not going to make you go through the really difficult process sometimes of figuring out what's wrong with something. For example, a mechanic could like look into like my Harley cylinders or the block on my Ford, and they could probably tell from the coloring and some of the other wear in the cylinder how many miles it's probably got left before it's going to start losing compression. Computer ain't going to tell you that. It's not going to tell you that. That's something that's only learned by doing. So Crawford is saying essentially that it shortcuts our ability to do things and our ability to think logically on how to really truly fix something. This could be why when I wanted to get my Ford or get my Harley fixed once, that the shop people said, we don't know how to do it. Why don't they don't know how to do it? Because all they're doing is pulling codes off a car. They don't know that there are very simple ways to deduce whether something is wrong. In Mortsky's case, what he did was he pulled the spark plugs and he could tell what was kind of going on and narrow it down to a couple things. Fuel injectors or the coil. I thought it was the fuel injectors. I was wrong, but it was the coils. Because they weren't the spark plugs weren't getting enough spark and it was fouling the plugs. Someone who only knows how to really deduce by pulling off codes isn't really going to be thinking about this sort of stuff because they're not in the habit of doing it. So that's sort of the rant for today. There's Crawford is his book, which I'll link, and maybe I'll have I'll put in a book cover for you, and I'll definitely link it in the description. Has something very real to say about these sort of things. It's sort of the technology sort of pushes us out of the market. It prevents men from doing work on their own cars. You know, and there's some girls out there who I was watching one the other day, was restoring, I can't remember what it was a Javelin or something like that. She was doing great body work on it. But for the most part, you know, anyone who wants to work on these cars is going to be shortcut by the technology. And it's because you have to learn and make mistakes to get things right. And you have to learn by digging into it and rolling up your sleeves and fixing it yourself, not relying on something else to tell you what's wrong. If you're always relying on something to tell you what's wrong, you're a sponge. You're not going to engage in critical thinking. You're not going to be in logical deduction of causation. And you're certainly not going to learn how an engine works. And you're not going to be able to really reliably work on stuff that is maintainable if you're always relying on a computer, which could always be wrong, to tell you what's up. So yeah, I totally recommend, highly recommend, you know, one of these days, hopefully I'll be like, you know, Puddin or Mortsky and have my own place like they do. They've got a really nice setup there where they can really do some serious work on these things, as does Tony and some of these other places have been around a lot longer than I have. I'm coming to this late, but anyway, you know, this is why we like these old vehicles, because if something goes wrong with them, they're usually pretty doable to fix. Might take some time, might be a huge learning curve for you, but there's nothing more satisfying, especially for guys, I think, at least the buddies that I hung around with, in working hard like this and fixing stuff. So anyway, okay, on to section 2 where I talk a little more about Mortsky, and that'll be it. All right, hang loose. Okay, where was I? One thing about new tripods that I put my GoPro on is it doesn't, you know, it's my GoPro still dies from battery usage. So battery went out, and that happens a lot. I see it happen a lot in a lot of people who use GoPros in these things. But anyway, Mortsky, he had a Chevy dually, white dually, I think it was, and it was just running a little bit off. I mean, it ran, and it ran pretty well, but it was just running a little bit off. So he got his OBD like I have, kind of one, you know, a simple one, and it said that I think it only blew one code. I could be wrong. If he's, you know, maybe he can comment on this somewhere. but if I do get something wrong. I thought the fuel injectors were shot. Of course, I was wrong. But the code it was running was running rich or something like that in bank 2 or something along those lines. Now it's a fuel injected truck, so it has fuel injectors, and I believe each cylinder has its own coil. Good Lord. But that's the way that's the way they made them. So I thought it was the fuel injectors. It wasn't the fuel injectors. It turned out that it was the coils. Now, what Morsky did, and this is really fabulous, is he pulled the plugs. Now, something that Crawford mentions, and I understood already because I've ran into it before, is that mechanics who only know how to pull the codes, only know how to read what's on their little computer screen. What happens is that they don't think the problem through, per se, and they don't have any experience to do what you say an old school mechanic might do, which is if you've got any problems with how it's running, and it could be fuel or spark related, you pull the plugs. And when you pull the plugs, it'll be either really kind of a pasty white, flaky white, or an oily black. And one of those two things will tell you that it's running rich or running lean. In this case, for Morsky, he had two spark plugs that were black, and I thought it was the injector dumping crap into the cylinder, because he was at one point, I think, was it that truck? I don't remember, but it was filling up with it might have been a different truck, but it was filling up with fluid into the cylinders, and he had to take the plugs out to blow it all out. But anyway, the other thing that would cause the problem is not only is it running too rich and it's dumping gas into the cylinder, thus fouling the plug, thus turning it black. It would be no spark, and that it seems like that's what was happening, or little spark not hot enough. In this case, it was a coil, so he had to replace 2 coils on that thing. But the only way to know that is if you dig into the problem. The OBD is not going to tell you everything, and the OBD might be wrong. As a matter of fact, I think it only listed one of the failures when it was 2 things that were failing. So that's it. Sort of rant for the day. I think modern cars have done a very destructive thing to not only young men who want to learn how to work on things and do something real, especially if they're interested in cars and mechanics and logically deducing problems. But I also think it's the way that they sort of recover something from themselves and from society that we're losing very, very badly. People stop and they look at a classic car. They do not do that to new cars. You should ask yourselves why that is. No one's going to look at a new car and go, oh wow, that's really cool. Even if it's, say, a new Corvette or a new Mustang. I mean, they might stop and look and say, ooh, Mustang, or ooh, Corvette, cool. But they're going to stop and look and spend time around a classic car. Same as it ever was. That'll never change. All right. Hang loose.
Okay, the language of machinery is logic. It's the common language that all machines use. Each part talks to each other in a direct way. They're cause and effect. This happens, so this happens. And that's it. That's how machines work. This happens, so this happens. And then you go further, the language of the mechanic is analytics. Right? You analyze the machine. You analyze the machine's logic and figure out where the flaw in that logic is, and there's your problem, and you fix the problem. All right. So let's start with this. One of the most simple common problems that we've always had, always come across, is a taillight lens, a cracked taillight lens, or a gasket around the taillight lens. It shrinks a little bit, and some water will get inside the taillight lens. And what will happen is, over time, see, the water can't find a convenient way out, so it stays in there, and it evaporates and condenses, and it just creates a wet environment inside the taillight lens. So over time, what will happen is, the glass on the bulb will shatter, right? Common, no big deal. Or the contacts will corrode, like on this old 1157. Some water got in the taillight lens and corroded up. The repair is simple. You clean the contacts, you throw a fresh bulb in there, you either replace the taillight lens or the gasket, or you fix it so no water can get back in there, and you're done. You motor on down the road. It's a few minutes, it's a few dollars, it's not a big deal. Most common thing in the world. Not anymore. So the reason I'm talking about this, the reason I bring this up, is because I watched a video this morning while I'm having my coffee. But he puts out a video, I see it this morning, and it's about he has a customer with, in 2018, 2017, 2018, whatever it was, F-150. And this thing had a taillight lens that let some water get into the taillight. And the net result, the end result of all of this, was a $5,600 repair. A truck that wouldn't start anymore, and a $5,600 repair. How is this even possible, right? Well, watch his video, because he lays out step by step everything that happened and the whole chain of events that led to it. But I'll give you a short version here. The F-150, or all cars, all modern cars, use a CAN bus system. And it operates on very, very low voltages, and it ties all of these modules together. So each system has a module, and they all communicate through this CAN bus. So when there's an issue in one of the circuits, one of the systems, or one of the circuits within that system, it affects all of the other circuits. So the moisture got into the taillight lens, and it corroded some connections. It created more resistance than should be. And as a result, it spread like a cancer through the vehicle. So first the radio wasn't working, and the heater controls weren't working. He was getting codes for this, that, and the other thing. And then eventually he goes out to start this truck, and it's bricked, like it's got nothing, right? So they tow it into this guy's shop, and he locates the problem, fixes the problem. $5,600, $5,600. There's no logic in this. There's no sustainability in this.
We have one heck of a video to come back with, and that is a situation that still blows my mind. Okay, so let's talk about it a bit. So this 2018 Ford F-150 Limited has every bell and whistles on it. Came in, the customer initially contacted me and said, you know, gee, I'm getting errors for my rear side obstacle detection modules in the back, and they're kind of going on the fritz, and then my climate control is a little erratic, and you know, there's a lot of different things going on. You check it out. I said, yeah, we'll fit you in a week or two. So while he's waiting to get in the shop, he's driving along, still using the vehicle, obviously, and one day, either while he's driving or when he came out from a store or something like that, he went in to start the vehicle up, and the thing was just unresponsive. So he had the vehicle towed on the hook to the shop. I said, I'll work it in. And you guys aren't going to believe what I found on it. Water intrusion into the rear tail lamps of the vehicle. Usually not a big deal. It may burn out some bulbs, make them blow up inside of there, stuff like that. Back in the day, and you'd get a new housing for $40, $50, $100, right? New OE housings. Some even include bulbs. Not too bad, no big deal, right? It happens. Happens with headlamps too. No big deal. But in this case, it is a big deal. The reason being is because he has a Limited, everything on here is just packed into here. So he has LED lamps in here instead of incandescent. And he has this side obstacle detection radar in the side here. So he has extra harnesses inside of there, the module, all that stuff in there. And it's very, very expensive, as you can imagine. So HS CAN, high-speed CAN, is where all the important modules are at, whereas medium speed are the medium important modules, right? And so it corroded it, and it did it on both sides, and then it started backfeeding other powers and grounds into those comm circuits, taking down every other module on the medium speed CAN network. Yeah, so as you can imagine, a lot of things were down and erratic, and eventually it didn't start for the guy. All because of the tail lamp. Well, the problem is these tail lamps, these darn tail lamps, are between $1,200 and $1,400 a piece. $1,200 and $1,400 a piece. So I asked the dealer, I said, that's very expensive. I know they're LED. Does that mean they include all the modules and everything else back here? No, they come bare, just like you see here. So that means we had to get the brackets, like a heat sink, and then the site obstacle detection modules in here. And they're around $450 each, $500 or so, no big deal. But we had to locate them because the modules are on back order. So we had to pay $335 in locate fees just to find those modules, get the vehicle back up and running and going down the road. So with that, the connector that goes into here to the body was also corroded, as you can imagine, so we need to replace that. So all in all, for some tail lamps that are not working, his bill is $5,600.